I'm going to turn off my video so my computer doesn't crash. I will miss seeing you all. I mean, I guess I see you all. You just won't see me, so. All right, that is off. Just need to do this part. Or was it this part? Or, oh, make with, yeah, it doesn't matter. Okay, so React. Let me find my notes. Here they are. Okay, React. So, how many of you have tested out Create React app yet?
I have.
Nice. I'm going to start sharing my screen then. So, Create React app is a NPM package that works with JavaScript to build a full functioning React application. It is a node package is very similar to a Ruby gem, right? In that it is a package that a ton of people wrote that's a bunch of code that will do some things for you. In this case, it built you an entire application. So if you remember Rails scaffold, it's similar to that, but you will always, always, always be allowed to use Create React App. There will never be an instance in Flatiron unless you want to do it by yourself, where you'll have to create a React application from scratch. Might be a really fun blog, but you'll never have to do it for a curriculum. So in order to use it, there are a couple things that we have to do. We have to install our package. So Create React app is something we need to install globally. So in order to do that, we would type in npm I. So this is similar to when you're doing a gem install. -G for global, and the name of the package, Create React app. Now, I've already installed it. I don't think it'll break if I do it again, but so this will be a little bit faster than it might be on yours, but this is installing all of Create React app inside of your application. Now, you can find out more about Create React app from its documentation. This? Not this one. It is, here you go. So this will give you the commands if you don't remember what they are. Here's the install, I short for install. And then when you want to run a Create React app, all you have to do is grab the name of the package, put it in here, and then name your application. In this case, we're going to do authors. And then React app will build everything for you, because you can watch it go. Now, while it's doing that, I'm going to show you a website that is built with React, and it's one that many of you are probably familiar with. I would like you to first take a note at this grayed out square here. This is our React developer tools. We can use this to break into React and kind of see what's happening with it. We won't be using it today, but this will become your best friend eventually. So I would highly encourage you to download the React developers tools. You can just download them, any Google Chrome extension. So Airbnb. Airbnb is run on React. I know that from experience, but I also know that because our React dev tools lit up here. So that just means that it is able to read the browser and tell that this has React in it. Now, Airbnb is a website that's made out of a lot of components. React is built around the idea of a component tree. And what that means is you're going to have a bunch of smaller components that are in bigger container components that build up. So I'm going to grab our annotate ability. Can I do that while I'm sharing? I think so, yeah. Draw squares. So if you look at this page, this entire page can be broken down into a big application. From there, you can actually break this into smaller components. You can break probably this into a smaller component. You can break this into a smaller component. And you can break probably this into its own thing. And maybe even this. And this. And if we look at these further down here, these cards are probably their own individual components also. So the idea is you start with something big and then get more specific in what you want to render. So I kind of want you to think all the way back to Mod 2, when last you saw me. We were rendering things on the screen with our ERB files. And if you remember how partials worked and the layering for that, React is kind of similar. So thinking back to Mod 2, can you kind of explain to me how partials worked and how getting your actual ERB files to render on the page worked? Does anyone remember, or have you hidden Mod 2 away behind JavaScript?
I think I remember. I remember doing partial forms where we would set up a form and then we could sort of use it as a template for like multiple purposes. So we could put it on like the edit page if we wanted to use the form to edit, or on the page to create a new something.
Yeah, exactly. So it's the idea of you being able to reuse code for other purposes. So you don't have to write it again and again, and being able to require that code in other places. If you remember, a partial had a line that you can require into another file, and it would render that partial in that file. And that is exactly what React does with its component tree. Now, I kind of want you to kind of keep this in mind as we're going through Create React App. After a while, after we cover everything, I am going to put you into breakout groups if we have time, and have you look at some websites that were made in React and see if you can break down what their component structure might look like. So we'll come back to this. Until then, let's go back to Create React App and see if it finished doing its thing. Let me put away annotate now. Okay, cool. Does this stay on here? Yeah, I have to delete this. Annotate. Garbage, goodbye, clear on my drawings. All right. So inside of here, if we ls, we can see I have two folders in here. One is a demo, don't worry about that. But the other is the application we made. So I'm going to CT into authors. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at everything that's in authors. Much like Rails, and I feel like you'll be drawing a lot of connections between Rails and React, you get a ton of files that you don't necessarily know what they're going to do. So we'll kind of cover that. The first file to look at is this package.json. A package.json is essentially your gem file, but it works with NPM packages. You can see by the dependency here what things are installed for Create React App. So Create React App gives you a couple things. It gives you React, React DOM, and React scripts. You don't really have to worry about this, but it just kind of pre-builds it all for you. If you want to install something in your package.json, you would not do it like you do a gem file. In gem file, you would have the name, put the version, and run bundle install. For anything with a package.json, for a node dependency, that's what we call this because this is technically Node.js, you would install it through the terminal, and essentially exactly how we installed our Create React App, but without the G. So it would be something like this. Now, I will cover this again when we get to a section where we have to install something, but if you end up playing around and you want to install something, this is how you do it. There's a couple other things on here. There's scripts. Now, we don't really need to worry about this right now, But the idea behind these is these will run files for you. When we do npm run start or npm test or anything like that, it executes those codes or that code. If you look in the code in your lab, you might see something else that might be connected to learn or mocha test, stuff like that. That's just scripts to run those files, and you won't be messing with this very much yet. Anyways, any questions on the package.json? You don't have to understand everything about it. You just have to know it's there, know not to touch it for the most part, unless you need to install something. Cool? Cool. All right. This git ignore file, if you have or have not seen one, allows you to not push up specific things to your GitHub. There are things in Create React App that are really large and you don't want on GitHub. So this automatically ignores them for you. So every time you do a git push, you won't push up your node modules, which is good. So let's take a look at our node modules and see maybe why we don't want to push them.
Scrolling for days.
It's a lot. 4 days indeed. You will never have to look in here. If you are seeing an error in your node modules, delete your node modules altogether and reinstall. You will never have to get in here, but because there are thousands of files, you never want to push this up to GitHub. It will take forever and it doesn't need to be stored up there. So node modules are the inner workings of the technologies that make React work, that make the things that React depends on work, and many other things, most of our packages. So you'll never have to go in here. If something tells you to go into your node modules, you might just have to delete it and re-download them. So like with Rails and Ruby, we had to do a bundle install. Does anyone know what the equivalent for node would be?
npm install.
Yeah, and we can just shorten it to npmi. So every time you pull down some code, anytime you do a create React app, you need to do npmi. This will load all of your packages for you and kind of get your environment set up for you. Now, this is going to take. Yep, go for it.
So after you did, so is it like any time after you build React app in your terminal, you're always going to have to do npmi after that?
So the order it would go in is you create React app, you install any extra packages you're going to install, and then you do npmi. But mostly for your purposes, it will be immediately after you do create React app until we get into things like React Router. So every time you pull down a lab, every time you do create React app, just do npmi immediately.
Okay.
Cool. I believe in it. To be honest, this goes faster, I feel, than like setting up a Rails server, so. Cool. All right. So there's one other thing you may not be super familiar with. You have worked with servers up to this point. You built your Rails servers, you worked with a JSON web server in order to build servers and serve you up data. Now, React runs on a node server. So this front end needs a server in order to work. And you might be asking why. It's partly because of these node modules. It's partly because of the things that are inside of React that make it work. Things like Webpack, things that will cause it to reload for you. A lot of the work that's under the hood needs the server to be going. So in order to run the server, we can do a couple commands, but one is yarn start. I believe that's what they list after you create a React app to get your server started. You can also do npm start, and that should work. Now, Node is interesting. It's a great blog topic if you want to ever use it. So I would recommend that, but I'm not going to go too heavy into what Node is and how to build a Node servers. We just don't cover it here. It's really fun though. You can spin up a server in 30 seconds, so great blog topic. So here is our React application. It's already up here spinning. It's on port 3000, and we can even follow this button to the React documentation. Awesome. So super simple, super easy. And if it wasn't for me talking, in less than a minute, we have an application up and running. Great. So let's take a look at what it's actually built on. I'm going to open our SRC. So everything you're going to work with is going to be located in this file. You will never have to go into public for the most part. Everything that you do, everything that you change will be in SRC. So we have a couple of different application or files here, a lot of which we don't necessarily need. So we technically don't need this, or this. I'll delete those in a second. The only real ones that you need that Create React App gives you is this index.js and this app. So I'm going to have you ignore this for a second. We'll talk about HOCs another time. But I want you to take a look at this line for me. I'll put this up here. I'm going to put this up here. Can anyone tell me what this line is doing? You can guess if you haven't gotten to it in the reading, just kind of breaking down what you know and what you have experienced in JavaScript so far. What do you think this line is doing?
It's grabbing an element in the index HTML with the ID of root, which is most likely a div.
Correct. We can actually look at that.
It is rendering our app and its children components.
100%. Thank you, Josh. So, Josh, do you prefer Josh or Joshua? I can't remember.
Either's great.
Okay, cool. So inside of our index.html, we grab a div with a root or an ID of root. So exactly right. That's what's happening. What React does is it sets up all of its JavaScript files, and then it will compile them for you, and then it will attach it to the DOM. So you never ever have to interact with the DOM when you use React directly, which is great. I'm sure that you at this point are kind of sick of making like 100 LIs with get element or create element by whatever, and then attaching it to everything, and then you forgot to attach this one LI, or something's broken and in the wrong spot. You don't have to do that anymore. Instead, we can just use React, and it will attach everything to the DOM for you. And we have some other ways of creating those elements. So to kind of show you exactly what this does, I'm going to put a paragraph here that says, hi. And now our beautiful React app just changed to this white page that says hi. This is just rendering what's here. So I can put a paragraph here, I can put an H1 here. It is just going to render this. But what React has for us is this app component instead. So it is actually rendering what's called JSX, which is essentially these, you can kind of identify it by like these little alligators, and rendering everything in this component. We're grabbing this from these imports up here. So in order to use packages and other files in React, we need to use this import keyword. We do import, we define a variable, and we define it with, or from, the package we're pulling it from. So in this case, we're pulling React from React and React DOM from React DOM. Now, I have these two files that aren't packages. They're files that are someplace in my tree. These I need to point to, and I need to tell this file where these are located relative to it. So in this case, app is in the same directory. So /app tells this that this app.js file is here. This is where we're grabbing app from. Once you grab it, load it here. Cool. Does that part make sense?
Yes.
Cool. All right. let's get rid of some things that we don't need. I don't think we need, no, we don't need this. We don't need this. We won't need this. We can save that. We can get rid of this. We can get rid of this. We can get rid of this. That was a cool logo though, thanks React. We can get rid of this. We can get rid of, we don't need this. And we can get rid of this. Now you don't technically have to get rid of these. They don't hurt anything by being there, but this will make it less cluttered. And that way, I don't want to rename it, I want it gone. There we go. That way, while you're looking at this and when you come back to reference it, you won't be confused about those files or what they do. I'll just leave these ones here. So, I'm going to take out these two things from this file because we don't have them anymore. All right, this should now go back to, where do I have logo? Ah, here. I'm going to delete all of this, and we'll talk about what this is in a second. Cool. Awesome. So, what does this look like? Right here.
That's a JavaScript function.
Exactly. React at its core is a bunch of JavaScript functions. It's functional programming at its best, really. There are two types of components we're going to discuss here. We're going to discuss a functional component and then a class component. But let's cover functional first. Now, you can write a functional component like this, or you can write it as an arrow function, which I'm going to change this to, because one, I prefer them. Two, they allow you to pass context. And if you don't remember what that is, because that was probably from a lecture in week 2 before projects, I would invite you to do a blog on it or read up on it. And 3, arrow functions are ES6. ES6 has been around for a long time. It is the standard of what JavaScript is. It is just better to use arrow functions in almost every situation, especially in React. So arrow functions work the same. Use them. They're great. They give you more abilities to do things and allow you to pass context. All right, so let's just put hi in here and see if we can get that on the page. We did it. Yes, what's up?
So that really quick, like the arrow function there. So is this kind of like an unnamed function that you're doing?
We named it right here, right? It's actually named app. So,
got it.
Yep. So with arrow functions, an anonymous arrow function wouldn't have this here. It would just be this part. But good question.
So instead of, so you couldn't, okay, so I'm just wondering, so like with a normal function, you would write function app and then you'd have your params. But with an arrow function, you're going to write const first and then whatever, and then equals, and then the params, and then an arrow.
This could be const or let. So this is the same as doing const app equals function. This is exactly the same thing as this, which is also the same thing as function app blah, 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 right?
Correct. Okay.
There's just different ways to write things. But this is a little bit better, and what again would encourage you to learn and do. It's good to know that this way to write things exists, but it's better to move towards kind of the future and utilizing arrow functions for the abilities that they have, right?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Any other questions about arrow functions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
So we're writing it like this for app.js. Mm-hmm. Do we also write that for our components, or are they slightly different?
So you'll write them for some of your components, and you won't necessarily use a functional component for app.js all the time. Each component, a functional component and a class component, have specific uses. And eventually you will understand which one goes to which. For right now, I want you to understand that class components can do everything that a functional component can and more. If you're ever confused and you're not sure, just go with a class component until after code challenge. Functional components are a little bit better for computation and memory. They don't take up as much as class components do. So when you refactor, once you start getting into projects, then comes a time when you start thinking to yourself, do I need a class component? And what do I need it for? When we get in a little bit later, when we talk a little bit more about state tomorrow, we will kind of go over what makes class components really, really different and why it takes more computational power and situations that it's appropriate versus a functional component. But for all your purposes,
the functional.
What? Sorry, what was that?
I was going to say, I was going to ask, so this one that we wrote out here is a functional component.
Correct.
Cool. Thanks.
Of course. Okay. So we have hi rendered on the page now. Cool. Now that we have this application, now that we've seen app, let's go ahead and make our own components, right? So to do that, we're going to do author.js. You can also do JXS if you want it, or SX if you want it, but JS makes more sense to me. And this, actually we're naming this authors plural. React is not as finicky about pluralization as Rails does. In fact, it will not error out so long as your naming convention matches. But for best practices, for what I want to use this for, authors is an appropriate name. So let's go ahead and build a functional component again. So the first thing we have to do is import React from React. Now, I'm going to give you a second to kind of think about what we had in our app folder. Does anyone who hasn't spoken yet want to give me kind of guidance on how I might build a functional component? Kind of like think about what you saw. Where do I start?
Maybe we have to also import the app.js.
We don't have to import app.js. We will have to import authors into app, though. So that is a good point. Let's go ahead and import that now. So we will use this here. But first, we need to do some stuff in here.
You have to declare a class called author.
Well, we're not declaring a class. We're declaring a function, right? Because this is going to be a functional component. But remember that in a second when we build our next component, because our next component is going to be a class. So we would start out like we did in app, start with a const, and then just do an arrow function. We would name this authors, put an arrow function here, and open up some curly brackets. So because we're exporting this, because we're going to end up requiring this in another file, we have a keyword that we have to put down here. And that's going to be export default. And then the item we are exporting. In this case, which is exporting authors, this will allow us to require authors in other files. You cannot have an import without an export. So it will error out and tell you what's happening, but if you're not sure, if you can't require something in, if it can't find the module, double check that you are exporting it correctly. So in React, our functional component knows it's a functional component because we required React in here. We are able to use a return keyword, release events, to render something on the screen here. So I'm going to put P, I'm going to put hello from authors. I'm going to save this. Now, I believe it was Gabriel who mentioned this. We required in authors from our author file, and we're going to render it inside of app. So when we think of our component tree, this is the most parent component. For the most part, you won't be doing things in here until you get to Redux. The next most parent component, the child of this component, is going to be app. So this is, index is often what's called your root component, and app is your most parent component. This component will connect to the rest of the components that you build. Every single component you make must somehow connect to app. So, in order for us to render authors, like app, we're going to use these alligators, or use our keyword authors, and close this. Right. Now, this is a self-closing syntax. So what this is essentially the same thing as like authors, but we're shortening it. And now it's just authors. So here we have hello from authors now. So this rendered that component for us. We can actually render it a couple times, as many times as we want. We only need to render it once in this case, but we'll remember that ability in a second because it's going to help when we make our card component. Now, let's kind of break down what's happening here. Authors is being exported from this file. It's being imported from here. React is calling authors with this JSX, and that is calling this function and returning what it returns and prints it to the screen. So this is currently returning a paragraph and it is rendering that to the screen. Now, this is a one-liner. If this was larger, which is mostly what you're going to see with this, you, instead of doing it like this, you're going to use parentheses. So you can have this on multiple lines. All right. Any questions about kind of that import, export, what's going on here, why we are returning a p tag here?
Yeah, I have a question.
Go for it.
If you go to the app.js,
Sure.
can you go over the online tool /authors? Why do we have to specify the dot and the slash?
So we don't need to, we can shorten this to the file name. We need to do a // because it's in the same directory. If this was in a nested directory, we would have to do something else to kind of explain where that file path is. Right now, this is in this root, and so we just need // and then the name of the files we want to access. This is the same as doing like authors.js. This is just pointing to the authors file and saying that I want this authors method from this authors file, or not function from this authors file.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, so when do you have to use the keyword render?
We will get there with class components. It's all coming together, building up. Just want to make sure that we get the simplest parts down before we hit classes, because classes are a little bit more complicated and have a couple layers to them. So does everything else about how functions get kind of transferred around and how this is rendering to the screen make sense? This is literally being called inside of app, and it is rendering what this application or this function returns. That part makes sense?
Yeah.
Cool.
Do you just have class name app in your app.js? Because do you have to have that there?
Where do you see class name app?
That's for the div, right?
Ah,
Yeah.
here. Oh, this was from
Okay.
leftover from before. We don't need that.
Okay.
My bad for not getting rid of that. This was from create React app. We don't need that. It was just for rendering and styling specifically.
Yeah.
Cool. Good thing to point that out. Anything else? I think we're good. We can move to
It
classes.
has to be a class name, or could be just class equals.
So this is actually a good question. We don't really have to worry about styling quite yet, but when we do, classes, instead of being class, will be class name. So,
All right.
cool. Okay, let's move on to classes. We would like to render multiple components, and multiple components that have the same data. Now, if we look at Airbnb again, we're going to try to make something like this. We want to render an author's card that will render some information about the author, maybe their name and genre, because that's what I put in my demo. But the idea is we are going to render multiple of these cards, but write only one component. So, I'm gonna do authors card.js. So, because this is a class component, or we'll get to that in a second, we have to import React from React again. And now, because this is a class component, what do we start a class with instead of const?
Class.
Yes. So, for class components, and this is going to look a little weird in a second, we name them whatever we need this component to be named, and we use a special keyword. We use a keyword called extends, and we are going to extend react.component and open this up like this. Okay. Does anyone remember what extends does by chance? It's okay if you don't.
It's like for modules?
Yeah, kind of. So, I mean, you're right. Extends is specifically for inheritance. So it is for modules. But here we are saying I need to grab the stuff from React. React has a child called component. I need component and I need the things from React. So this just always needs to be here. You might have also seen it like up here with some curly braces and component, and then it just being this. Either way works. It doesn't super matter to me which way you use. I think the labs do it the second way. Both of them, same thing, just inheritance. This part needs to be here in some capacity. Okay, so someone mentioned a render method. When you're building class components is when you have to use your render method. This is basically just saying anything in here we want to render. And within that, we are nesting a return, which is gonna have some things. For right now, let's go ahead and just do an H1 and we'll put author. So I want to now import this to my authors file. Can someone tell me what I need to add to this and authors in order to import author's card?
Export.
Yeah. Export defaults. Eventually, you'll just get in the habit of every time you do something or you make a component, you will immediately do export default.
This one says author's card, and then the class says author card.
Thank you. And then in here, inside of authors, we don't actually need this. It might have auto-generated, or I wrote it without noticing. But what do we need to import here?
Author's card from authors /author's card.
Perfect. Actually, I'm going to keep it author's card and then just keep this consistent. Again, as long as it matches, it won't care, but just for good practice, keeping it consistent so I know what it's doing later on when I look at this again is a good idea.
Oh, because you could, in the import, you could name it whatever you want, right?
Exactly.
That's right.
Okay. Author's card looks good. Just making sure I'm not misspelling anything again. Okay. So we're going to use this now. And we are going to invoke it down here. And we're going to invoke it multiple times. Now,
at this point, this is not a card yet, right?
Not quite yet. We haven't added anything to it. Right now, this is just a H1 that says authors.
Okay.
So React's going to be a little bit angry about this, but I want you to see this error because you will run into it. So JSX elements must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. So you can either use fragment or you can use a div. This is just the way JSX is. You need a container tag wrapping everything that you put in your return for the most part, with a couple exceptions. If it's a single element, it doesn't care. Or if you use a fragment from React, it doesn't care. But the simplest thing, if you're getting that error, is just throw this div in. Cool. Author's card from author's card. Did I misspell again?
It's outside of your source folder, it looks like.
Oh, thank you. Beautiful. Author, author, author. Now, we don't want to see author a million times, right? What's the point of that? We need to get our author card some data. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab some fake data I made ahead of time, and I'm going to put in authors. Now, some of you who are already on state know how state works. This is normally where you would work with state, but we are just going to put state off till tomorrow and just talk about something called props. So if you're on state, don't worry about it right this second. We'll talk about that more tomorrow, and just kind of love that you have that knowledge ahead. So for right now, I'm just going to define this authors array. Let's wrap this. Toggle word wrap. There we go. Oh, I don't like how that looks either. Oh well. So this authors array is an array of a couple authors that were on my Kindle, and their genres. So I need to get this information down to my author's card. So for my author's card, I would like to print the name of an author. I'll just put a name here right now. And then we'll start with just name. We can do name and genre. When we were in, not to bring up Rails again, but when we were in Rails and we had something like an array of objects or something that we needed to render to the page, maybe a couple of list items, how did we do that? Did we write like 15 individual LIs for everything in your array? Or did we do it dynamically? We did it dynamically, I'm hoping everyone says. But do you remember how we did that? Can someone kind of walk me through how you would do that? So let's say I was requiring this for my view in my Rails application. How do I render every single item in this array?
We want to iterate through so we can look at each object's key value pairs.
Exactly. So we need to iterate through authors array, and we need to do that inside of this return. Now, in order for us to do normal JavaScript, not JSX, in here, we need to tell JSX that we're going to do it by putting these curly braces here. This is the same as squids and ice cream cones. When you wanted to do some Ruby in your views, you need to put squid and ice cream cone. When you want to do some JavaScript in JSX, you need to put these squigglies. So inside of here, I'm going to grab our authors array and put it on another line. Make it, oh, why am I doing this? There we go. And we're going to map through this. I'm going to have for every author, I am going to invoke, I'm going to call our authors card. I had too much coffee, y'all. By writing it here and deleting these. So we're not going to do anything quite yet, but for every single author in our author array, we're going to render the author card. So we have 4 objects in our array. It renders the author card 4 times. Does that part make sense before I move on?
Yes, I understand.
Cool. All right. So now we have to like put some pass some data to our author card, and we're going to do that through props. So in order to use props, we need to first define a keyword name for our prop. So it's going to be author. I'm going to do this equals, and then I'm going to pass it the item we need. And in order to do that, the syntax is these curly braces, and we're going to pass it authors. All right. Inside of author card, in order to look at that, we have to look at a object called props. I'm going to console log it and pass it this.props. So you'll notice this is written angry. We can't console log outside of our render. If you want to console log, you'll have to do it down here. Now it's not angry anymore. Let's take a look at props. Props is a specific thing that React has. This is our propped object. Our propped object has authors in here from when we passed it down. This doesn't have to necessarily be named authors. In fact, we can name it like cat. And now we pass down an object called cat. So for every author object, we pass down that author and everything that it has. But for simplicity's sake, close this yarn file, we're just going to do author, because again, for convention's sake, so I know what this is doing, that knowing that this is an author and I can select my author by the keyword of author makes my life easier. Now, I'm getting this warning, and it's because it wants every child in this list to have a key. It won't actually break your code, but if you want it to go away, you define key, and then you have to give it a unique value. It can either be a random number, the ID of the item you're passing, or in our case, it could just be the authored name, because this will be unique and it will go away. But again, that won't break your code if you don't have it. So now that we have our author down here, we can access it inside of our author card. So in order to access this, I have to go into our props object, curlies, and then select the parameter I want. In this case, I want name. And this should, in an ideal world, render. Oh, author, what I just explained to you. There we go. So we grabbed props, we identified the key that we wanted to render, and then the property from author that we wanted to render. So I know I've been going at this at a snail's pace, and it's kind of ridiculous. But this is the key to React. React is something that kind of needs to work together in order to work. You need to understand how the entire hierarchy communicates in order to use it correctly. Understanding props and understanding how things are passed to each other is the only way that you will eventually understand React. React is like a hill. It's a little weird, it's tough, and it's difficult until you get to the top, and once you get to the top, it's super easy. But until you get there, you're going to stumble a little bit. So that's why I'm taking this as slow as I can. So props is one of the most important aspects of React. Let's talk about anything that you don't understand about what's happening here.
Can we go back to our authors.js file?
Yes.
So authors array.map, we're doing through each author, you're calling the author's card component. And then what happens here? You're setting a variable called author, and what is it inside the key or the curly braces author?
This author is this author. So this is like, if I did cat here. It also has to match on the other page, but this is basically whatever you're passing. This could be author again. This specifically is the keyword that prop's going to be named. This connects to this author and is what's going to be passed down through here.
Okay.
Cats didn't have a name, that's why it errored out. So if I did something like got rid of this and then just passed cats, not worry about this key for right now. Let's get rid of that altogether. And just do another H1 here. Cats. It just renders cats. Make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. Anything else about this that doesn't make sense?
Yeah, X, I'm still a little bit confused about what key is. Like key equals author name.
So this is, if we remove this, we're going to get a warning. And this is just something that React wants. It won't break if you don't have it. As you can see, this is rendering on the page. It wants a unique key for every prop like this that you pass through. And in order to get rid of this error, I just put in that key. Now, again, you don't really have to worry about this. If this is here, it's not going to break anything. I only put that in because I don't want to see this anymore. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Functionally, it does nothing for you as far as you're concerned.
What is the author equals authors? What is that doing?
So
author.
Where?
Yeah, I'm confused on kind of that whole part where you call author's card. Like, I understand the author is before that you're iterating through the authors, but then same with Josh, I'm confused where it goes author's card, author equals author.
So this author's card is the card that we required in, right? And we are passing this a object of author. The author comes from the author we defined here in our map. We're passing that here. And our author is the keyword that we will use to access this later. So by doing this, I want you to imagine props as something every single class in React has. It's just an object that it has that it's holding on to. What this is doing is it's taking the author from map. When you iterate through the map, it takes that one author and it shoves it into props. And in props, you can then access that author. So when I console logged prop, we have the entire author object here.
Cool.
Does that make sense, or do I need to find?
Yeah,
Okay, cool. Because I have 15 ways to explain this with a lot of like metaphors. So like if you don't get it, we can keep going over it.
Is props like short for properties or something like that?
I think so. I never really thought about it, but it would make sense for it to be short for properties. Maybe it's prototype. It could be a lot of things. I don't know what it's short for. Maybe a fun blog topic. That'd be a very short blog topic, but still something to look up. It's just an object that allows you to pass data from one component to another. So, because there's just times that you are going to want to do that. Like in this example, instead of writing an author card 4 times, I can just map through my author card or my authors and then pass it to author card. I'm checking to see if I see any more confused faces.
The this keyword.
Okay. So this is a class. In order for us to access any properties that are on a class, yeah, that's probably its properties, we need to use the this keyword. So this author's card is inheriting things from React and components, which is giving it access to its props, but it's still a property on those objects. So in order for us to access this, or access props, we need to use the this keyword. You only need this in class components. After we kind of get this settled, I'll talk about how we pass data through functional components. But this is essentially allowing us to access props.
Is the in your authors.js file, is the like author card like JSX tag, is that like kind of like just like a class method?
So kinda, yeah. It's an instance of an author's card, and we defined a class of authors here. So
right on. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Pretty much. Technically, if you remember anything about object-oriented programming in JavaScript and functional programming in JavaScript, classes don't really exist, but for your purposes, just think of it as a class if that helps, because it acts exactly like a class does, because it just makes things easier. Object-oriented programming is great. Classes are great.
Right on.
What else?
I have another question, Nix.
Go for it.
In authors.js file, like right now, we're just passing the author to the author's card.
Mm-hmm.
But if we wanted to, or wait. Well, when you had the key in there, I'm just wondering, like, could this be a case where we would pass multiple things to the author's card, and if so, what would we do with the key?
So you can pass as many things as you want through here. The key, like you saw before, I can have multiple things passed to as props. So let's try doing like cat is, I was not creative today, y'all, I'm sorry. Cat. I'm going to pass a property of cat. So author gets passed down along with my cat into my props. So you can put as many of these on here as you want. If you can also kind of stack your data, which you'll end up doing. What I mean by that is you can send multiple things in a single variable through your props. So this kind of needs to be like this. Let me try to think. Let's say I wanted let cat equal cat, let dog equal dog, let fish equal fish. If you're on state, this is kind of how we end up passing state down with one keyword. I'm going to let array equal cat, dog, fish. So, actually, I want to make this an object. Cat is cat, dog is dog, fish is fish. If I wanted to pass this down, I could just pass this array, quotes, since it was an array, down here instead. And that will pass all that data down there. And now we have a object of R that has all those other all these strings in there. So it's just down to nesting your data inside of other data and then passing that one keyword into your props. That would be the easiest, or doing something like this where you're passing multiple keys and multiple props. You can do this in one line or a little smushed together, but for right now, let's just think about it like this because it will be easier for your brains right now. Anything else about this?
So this way now we can use like author's card for like multiple screens.
Yes, exactly.
Wherever we want to use it.
Yep, 100%. That's exactly why we did this and what this is for. Technically, I could even call this further up here if I wanted, if I could just require it into here. We wouldn't want to, it wouldn't be a good convention, but if I wanted to do that and then call it here, and then pass a author that happens to be like a object with a name, an author with a key name cat. If we want to do something like this, we could pass this down. Needs the closing. And author name card. What do I like about this?
I think you're missing a curly bracket.
Thank you.
Right?
Yes, you are correct. I don't know. Unexpected token. Maybe he just doesn't like that this object is like this. Let's try. Or maybe I'm missing. Oh, I'm still missing this. There we go. Cat.
Cool.
But again, this is not great practice. We don't want to put this in the most parent in this particular case. If we had data that went to every single child, putting that data in the app would be a great idea. That's one of the reasons why we have this nested structure, and we have parents that could hold that data. But in this case, the only component that needs my data is authors, so I'm just going to define it down here. Now, any child of authors, that's what we call these cards that are connected to it. Authors is a child of app, and author card is a child of authors. We can essentially just pass all that data down to it, whatever it needs. So if you imagine this like on a component tree, you can imagine, let me get my handy dandy annotate out again. If you take a second to imagine this is your app. And from there, it ends up passing data down to its child of authors. And authors has a child of author card in which it passes the data we defined up here down. Make it more clear, let's put some lines. Ooh, let's do arrows. Yeah. Goes on there, and this goes down here. So if I put data up in here, I could pass it down to authors, that could then pass that data down to author card. All right. Anything else about this that doesn't make sense? I know we're spending a lot of time on it, and I know we've been at this for almost an hour now, but this is the most important thing next to state anyways, that you'll learn from a React. So if there's anything about this, anything about passing props that doesn't make sense, let's address it now.
It's like kind of confusing because it's like the children supply like the form, like our author's card like specifies like how you want the like information to be like formatted or something, but the like parents supply the actual data, like things that go in the form.
Exactly.
Is that true?
That's 100%. That's a great explanation of it. The child card, this particular card is a presentational component. It is the only thing that is responsible for is the logic that renders the stuff for the view. So in general, you don't want to put any other logic except for the view information. Clear all my drawings. Get rid of annotate. No, press that. Anything in here has to do with what's being rendered to the screen. We'll talk a little bit more about convention of that later, but generally your children cards that are affecting the view specifically just has the things that it wants to render. Any logic that you have is going to go in a more parent component, maybe in authors, that is what we call a container component, or maybe even app. Cool. So I'm going to take authors, and I am going to pass it to app real fast. And it's going to break some things and be unhappy. So app being a functional component is a little bit different. I am going to pass our authors array through the authors component. Now, the thing about this is our authors component is not a class component. In order for me to get props, I need to define it as an argument. And then in order for me to access it, I need to call props dot whatever the thing I passed down is. If we console log this, author props, we can see up here that our author array is here and like this. So this is kind of what's happening under the hood with the classes, except for it's being put into a class, and you need this. Since this is a functional component, all we have to do is name our argument and then call whatever property from our argument we're trying to access. So this is how, if it's a non-class component, this is how you pass props. If it's a class component, use this. If it's confusing you, just always use class components. Makes your life easier. Until after the code challenge anyways. Does this part make sense? This should be a little bit more familiar to you at least, because it's calling and passing data.
This makes sense.
Cool. All right. That's all I have for today. Tomorrow we'll work on state. If you have any questions you weren't comfortable asking during lecture, feel free to reach out to me one-on-one, and I will go over passing props with you as many times as you want. I will stop this video